The morning light filtered through my kitchen window, casting familiar shadows across the countertops where I had prepared thousands of meals over the decades. I was making pancakes when I heard the soft footsteps behind me. My granddaughter, Meadow, stood in the doorway wearing her purple pajamas, her dark hair uncombed and her eyes red from crying. She was only 12 years old, but in that moment, she looked burdened by something far beyond her years. I am Thora Bancroft. I turned 71 last March. My hands shake a little more than they used to, and my knees complain when the weather changes. But my mind remains sharp. Perhaps that's why what happened next hurt so deeply. Meadow approached slowly, clutching her phone against her chest like it contained something dangerous. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon filled the kitchen, but I could sense something had shifted in the air between us. She whispered my name, and I turned from the stove to face her properly. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Grandma, Mom, and Dad are putting you in a nursing home today." The spatula I had been holding clattered against the stove. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. My son, Camden, and his wife, Sloane, had been distant lately, but I attributed it to their busy schedules. Camden worked in commercial real estate, and Sloane managed a boutique marketing firm. They were always rushing somewhere, always stressed about something. But a nursing home, without even discussing it with me. Meadow's hands trembled as she turned her phone toward me. On the screen was a video, clearly recorded secretly from behind a partially closed door. I recognized my living room immediately. The cream-colored sofa I had reupholstered myself, the family photos on the mantel. In the video, Camden sat forward on that sofa, his face illuminated by the lamp beside him. His expression was cold, calculated. Beside him, Sloane leaned back with her arms crossed, nodding along as he spoke. I pressed play, and my son's voice filled the kitchen, each word landing like a physical blow. "The place I found is perfect. They specialize in memory care, which gives us the legal angle we need. We tell everyone she's declining mentally. Who's going to question it? She's 71. Sloane's voice responded, smooth and practiced. "And the house. When do we get access to the deed?" Camden continued. "Once she's placed, I have power of attorney. The house goes into a trust. We sell it within 6 months, split the proceeds. Her savings accounts are substantial. She's been hoarding money for years, living like she's poor. It's ridiculous." They both laughed then. That sound, the casual cruelty of it, made my stomach turn. The video continued for another minute, detailing their plans with frightening precision. They had researched facilities, consulted lawyers, and even prepared a narrative for extended family about my supposed cognitive decline. They had been planning this for months. When the video ended, I looked at Meadow. Tears streamed down her young face. She spoke through her sobs. I heard them talking last night after they thought I was asleep. I recorded it because I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe I misunderstood. But I didn't. Did I? "Grandma?" I pulled her into my arms, feeling her small body shake against mine. The pancakes on the stove began to burn, filling the kitchen with acrid smoke, but neither of us moved. When did we become strangers to each other? I raised Camden in this house. I changed his diapers, sat with him through fevers, taught him to ride a bicycle in the driveway. I attended every school play, every baseball game. When his father, my husband Marcus, died 15 years ago, I held our family together through the grief. And now he wanted to warehouse me away so he could profit from my life's work. Meadow pulled back and looked at me with those serious eyes. "What are you going to do?" I glanced around the kitchen, at the home I had lived in for 43 years. Every corner held memories. The pencil marks on the doorframe tracking Camden's height through childhood. The cabinet door that stuck slightly because Marcus had never quite fixed it properly. The windowsill where I grew herbs in small pots. But it was just a house. Just walls and wood and glass. What mattered was standing in front of me, a 12-year-old girl brave enough to show me a truth that would destroy her own family's stability. I wiped Meadow's tears, and then my own. I kissed her forehead gently. Then I walked upstairs to my bedroom, moving quietly, though the house was empty except for us. Camden and Sloane had left early for what they claimed was a breakfast meeting. Now I understood it was probably a final meeting with the nursing home administration. I pulled my old leather suitcase from the closet and began to pack. Not everything, just enough. Comfortable clothes, my medications, my mother's jewelry, Important documents I kept in a fireproof box under my bed. My passport, birth certificate, the deed to the house, bank statements, the will Marcus and I had drawn up decades ago. Meadow watched from the doorway as I moved methodically through the room. "Where will you go?" Her voice was small, frightened. I didn't have an answer yet. I had some money in accounts Camden didn't know about. An old savings account from before we were married that I had maintained separately. Not a fortune, but enough to survive for a while. I thought about calling friends, but most were either deceased or dealing with their own declining health. My sister lived in Arizona, but we hadn't spoken in years after a falling out over our mother's estate. I was alone. The realization should have terrified me, but instead, it ignited something I thought had long gone dormant. A fierce independence I remembered from my younger years, before marriage and motherhood had softened my edges. I finished packing and carried the suitcase downstairs. Meadow followed, still in her pajamas. At the front door, I turned to her one last time. I couldn't take her with me. She was their daughter, their responsibility, and despite everything, I wouldn't damage her relationship with her parents by kidnapping her into my uncertain future. But I also couldn't leave her with nothing. I knelt down, ignoring the protest in my knees, and took her hands in mine. "You did the right thing showing me that video. That took courage most adults don't have. Remember that courage, Meadow. You're going to need it." She nodded, tears flowing again. "Will I see you again?" "I hope so, sweetheart. But right now, I need to take care of myself. Your parents made their choice. Now I'm making mine." I kissed her goodbye, held her one more time, then opened the door and stepped out into the cool October morning. The neighborhood was quiet. Most people already at work or school. Fallen leaves covered the sidewalk in shades of orange and brown. I had always loved autumn in Baltimore, the way the air carried that particular crispness, the way the light slanted differently through the trees. I walked to the end of the driveway and looked back at the house, the white colonial with its black shutters and neat landscaping. It looked peaceful, inviting even. But I knew the truth now. It had become a trap. I turned away and began walking, my suitcase rolling behind me on the sidewalk, making a rhythmic clicking sound against the concrete seams. I had nowhere to go, no plan, no clear destination. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something besides resignation. I felt free. Nafromrat. Chapter 2. The first night. I walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes before my legs began to ache seriously. The suitcase, which had seemed light when I first left the house, now felt like it contained stones. I found myself in the commercial district near the harbor, where tourists wandered between seafood restaurants and souvenir shops. The smell of crab cakes and Old Bay seasoning drifted from open doorways. Normally, I loved this area, the energy of it, the life. Today, it felt overwhelming. I spotted a small cafe with outdoor seating and made my way to an empty table, grateful to sit down. The October sun felt warm on my shoulders, despite the cool breeze coming off the water. A young waitress with bright pink hair approached and asked what I wanted. I ordered coffee and a sandwich I had no appetite for, but I knew I needed to eat something. As I sat there watching people pass by, the reality of my situation began to settle in like cold weight in my chest. I had left my home with no plan. I had perhaps $15,000 in my private account, but that wouldn't last long in a city like Baltimore. I needed somewhere to stay, at least temporarily. Hotels were expensive, and my pride wouldn't let me check into some cheap motel where the desperation would remind me too much of my own. The waitress returned with my order, and I forced myself to take a few bites of the turkey sandwich. It tasted like paper in my mouth. My phone, which I had silenced, showed 7 missed calls from Camden and 3 from Sloan. I imagined them returning home to find me gone. Meadow probably crying, telling them what she had done. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what excuse they would manufacture, what lies they would try to feed me. But a stronger part of me knew that hearing their voices would only weaken my resolve. I deleted the notifications and continued eating mechanically. An older man at the next table glanced over at me, then at my suitcase. He had kind eyes, weathered skin, and wore a veteran's cap. He caught my eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that needed no words. I nodded back, grateful for the simple human connection. When I finished eating, I paid the bill and checked my phone for hotels nearby. There was a small boutique hotel 6 blocks away, moderately priced. It would deplete my savings faster than I liked, but it would give me time to think, to plan my next move. The walk to the hotel was harder than the first walk had been. My body was reminding me of my age with every step, but I made it, pulling my suitcase up the 3 steps to the entrance with determination. The lobby was small but clean, decorated in nautical themes with blue and white striped fabrics and framed photographs of sailing ships. A young man behind the desk looked up as I entered. I approached and asked about availability. He checked his computer and confirmed they had a single room available. "How long will you be staying?" His question was routine, but it hit me like an accusation. "I don't know yet. Can I pay night by night?" He nodded and processed my credit card. Within minutes, I had a key card and directions to room 214 on the 2nd floor. The room was small but adequate. A queen bed with white linens, a desk, a bathroom with clean tiles, a window overlooking the street. It smelled faintly of cleaning products and lavender. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. For the first time since Meadow had shown me that video, I allowed myself to fully feel the weight of what had happened. My son wanted to imprison me, not out of concern for my welfare, but for money. The house I had lived in for over 4 decades, the savings Marcus and I had carefully accumulated, the security I had built, all of it reduced to assets to be liquidated. And Sloane. I had welcomed her into our family when she and Camden married 14 years ago. I had helped plan their wedding, had been there when Meadow was born, had babysat countless times, had tried to be supportive even when I disagreed with their choices. Had she always seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth? The tears came then, hot and bitter. I cried for the family I thought I had. I cried for the grandson I would never have, for holidays that would never happen, for the relationship with Meadow that would now be complicated and painful. I cried for Marcus, wishing desperately that he was still here, that I didn't have to face this alone. When the tears finally subsided, I lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the muted sounds of the city outside. Car horns, distant voices, the rumble of trucks on cobblestone streets. I must have fallen asleep, because when I opened my eyes again, the room was dark and my phone showed it was past 9 in the evening. My body ached from sleeping in an awkward position. I sat up slowly, disoriented for a moment about where I was. Then it all came rushing back. I turned on the bedside lamp and checked my phone. 23 missed calls now. 12 voicemails, countless text messages. I scrolled through them, reading the progression from confusion to anger to what appeared to be concern. Camden's first text. "Mom, where are you? We need to talk." Sloane's. "Thora, please call us. Meadow is very upset." Camden again. 2 hours later. "This is ridiculous. You can't just disappear. I'm calling the police." That one made me laugh, a bitter sound in the empty room. "Call the police and tell them what? That the mother you were planning to commit against her will has escaped." The most recent message was from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it cautiously. "Mrs. Bancroft, this is Detective Corbin Ashford with Baltimore PD. Your son has filed a missing person report. Please contact me at this number to confirm your safety." So Camden had actually done it. He had involved the police, probably spinning some story about my supposed mental decline, painting himself as the concerned son. I called the number immediately, not wanting some welfare check to complicate things further. Detective Ashford answered on the second ring. His voice was professional but not unkind. "This is Thora Bancroft. I understand you're looking for me. Mrs. Bancroft, thank you for calling. Your son indicated you left your home this morning and he's concerned about your welfare. I chose my words carefully. I appreciate his concern, but it's misplaced. I left of my own volition and I'm perfectly safe. I'm staying at a hotel in the city. I'm not lost, not confused, and not in danger." There was a pause. "Can you tell me which hotel? I'd like to verify your situation in person if that's acceptable." I gave him the hotel name and room number, understanding that he was just doing his job. He arrived 40 minutes later, knocking politely on my door. Through the peephole, I saw a man in his mid-50s, African-American, wearing a sport coat and carrying himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much human dysfunction. I opened the door and invited him in. He remained standing just inside the doorway, respectful of my space. He asked me basic questions about my mental state, my plans, whether I was under any duress. I answered honestly, explaining that I was fully competent and had left home due to a family dispute I preferred not to detail. His eyes were kind, but assessing. He had probably dealt with countless elder abuse cases and knew the signs. After about 10 minutes, he seemed satisfied. "Mrs. Bancroft, you're clearly capable of making your own decisions. I'll file a report that you've been located and are safe. Your son may not like it, but legally, there's nothing requiring you to return home or even contact him if you don't wish to." The relief I felt was enormous. After he left, I ordered room service, not wanting to venture out again. I ate chicken soup and bread while sitting at the small desk, trying to formulate some kind of plan. I couldn't stay in this hotel indefinitely. I needed a more permanent solution, but more than that, I needed to protect myself legally. Camden had power of attorney, or at least he claimed he did. I needed to verify that, and if it was true, I needed to revoke it immediately. I also needed to change my will, update my banking information, ensure that everything I owned would not fall into their hands. Tomorrow, I would start making calls. Tonight, I would rest. As I lay in bed later, the hotel room dark except for the ambient light from the street, I thought about Meadow. I hoped she was okay. I hoped my leaving wouldn't damage her too severely. But I also knew that children are often more resilient than we give them credit for. She would survive this, and perhaps seeing her parents for what they truly were might save her from becoming like them. That was my last thought, before exhaustion pulled me under into a dreamless sleep. Chapter 3. Legal Battles. I woke early the next morning, my body protesting the unfamiliar bed, but my mind clear and focused. I showered, dressed in comfortable slacks and a sweater, and made a list of what needed to be done. First priority was finding a lawyer. I needed someone who specialized in elder law and estate planning, someone who could move quickly. I used my phone to research firms in Baltimore, reading reviews and checking credentials. By 9 o'clock, I had called 3 offices and secured an appointment for that afternoon with a woman named Iris Gallagher, whose reviews praised her aggressive advocacy for elderly clients. Her office was in a professional building downtown, accessible by bus. I was determined to avoid taxis when possible, to stretch my limited funds as far as they would go. The bus ride took me through neighborhoods I rarely visited anymore, areas that had changed dramatically over the years. Some had gentrified, old row houses renovated into expensive condos. Others had declined, storefronts empty and windows boarded. Baltimore was a city of contrasts, beautiful and broken in equal measure. Iris Gallagher's office was on the 4th floor, a modest suite with comfortable furniture and walls lined with law books. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with glasses on a chain, greeted me warmly and offered me coffee while I waited. Iris herself appeared 10 minutes later, a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair cut short and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore a navy suit and practical shoes, and her handshake was firm. In her private office, I told her everything. About Meadow's video, about Camden and Sloane's plans, about leaving my home and the police report. I showed her the video on Meadow's phone, which I had asked her to send me before I left. Iris watched it twice, her expression growing harder with each viewing. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "Mrs. Bancroft, I want to be direct with you. This is a clear case of financial exploitation and attempted elder abuse. Your son's intentions are documented in his own words. We can use this to protect you, but we need to move quickly." She explained the legal steps we would take. First, we would file for a restraining order against both Camden and Sloane, prohibiting them from contacting me or accessing any of my property. Second, we would revoke any existing power of attorney documents and create new ones naming a neutral third party or professional fiduciary. Third, we would update my will and establish a trust that would protect my assets from any legal challenges. "And the house?" I asked. "Can they force a sale?" "Not if you revoke the power of attorney and we file the proper paperwork. The house is in your name alone, correct?" I nodded. Marcus and I had owned it jointly, but after his death, it transferred to me completely. Then legally, Camden has no claim to it unless you've signed documents giving him authority. Have you? I thought carefully. Years ago, Camden had brought me papers to sign. claiming it was just routine estate planning to make things easier if I ever became incapacitated. I had signed them, trusting him completely. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. I told Iris about the documents, and her jaw tightened. "We'll need to obtain copies of everything you signed and review them carefully. If he used deception to obtain your signature, we may be able to argue undue influence or fraud. But that will take time, and may require litigation. How much will this cost?" She named a figure that made my stomach drop. But she must have seen the panic in my face because she quickly added that she could work on a payment plan and that some of the costs might be recoverable if we sued for damages. I agreed to everything. What choice did I have? We spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, signing documents, outlining my assets and debts. By the time I left her office, I felt both empowered and exhausted. The restraining order would be filed that afternoon, and if approved by a judge, Camden and Sloan would be legally required to stay away from me. But I also knew this was just the beginning. They wouldn't accept this quietly. Camden had too much at stake, and from what I had learned about Sloan over the years, she was not someone who gave up easily. I took the bus back toward the hotel, but on impulse, I got off a few stops early near the inner harbor. The afternoon was pleasant, and I needed time to think, to process everything. I walked along the waterfront, watching tourists take photos and children chase pigeons. The water was gray-green and choppy, reflecting the overcast sky. I found a bench and sat down, pulling my coat tighter against the wind. An old couple walked past, holding hands, laughing at something one of them had said. They looked to be in their 80s, moving slowly but together, comfortable in their companionship. I felt a sharp pang of loneliness watching them. Marcus had been gone for 15 years, but sometimes the ache of his absence felt fresh. He would have known what to do about Camden. He would have confronted him directly, demanded answers, forced accountability. But Marcus wasn't here, and I had to handle this alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a text from an unknown number. "Grandma, it's me. I got a new phone. Mom and Dad took my old one. Are you okay? Meadow." Relief flooded through me. I typed back quickly. "I'm okay. Sweetheart, I'm safe. How are you?" Her response came immediately. "They're really mad. They hired a lawyer. They keep saying you're sick and that I shouldn't have shown you that video. But I know you're not sick, Grandma. I know you're okay." Tears pricked my eyes. "You did the right thing, Meadow. I promise you that. This isn't your fault. When will I see you? I don't know yet. It's complicated. But I love you very much. I love you too." I sat there for a long time after that exchange, staring at the water, feeling the weight of everything that had been lost and everything that still hung in the balance. A seagull landed nearby, eyeing me hopefully for food. I had nothing to give it, so it eventually flew away, its cry echoing across the harbor. As the afternoon faded toward evening, I made my way back to the hotel. The man at the front desk greeted me by name now, a small familiarity that felt both comforting and sad. In my room, I ordered dinner again and ate while watching the news, though I absorbed nothing of what was being reported. My phone rang around 8 o'clock. Iris Gallagher's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. "Mrs. Bancroft, the restraining order has been approved. It's temporary for now, but the judge was very clear. Your son and daughter-in-law are not to contact you, come near you, or access your property. The order includes your home, which means they cannot enter it without your permission." "Thank God," I whispered. "There's more. I had an associate review the documents you signed previously. The power of attorney was indeed valid, but the circumstances under which you signed it are questionable. We're going to argue that you were deceived about its scope and purpose. I've already filed a revocation with the appropriate authorities." She paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "You should also know that Camden's attorney contacted me this afternoon. They're threatening to file for guardianship, claiming you're mentally incompetent." Anger flashed hot through my chest. Can they do that? They can try, but it's going to be very difficult for them now. You've demonstrated clear capacity by retaining legal counsel, by taking steps to protect yourself, and you have the detective's report confirming your competence. Still, we need to be prepared for a fight. I thanked her and ended the call, feeling simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. Camden wasn't going to let this go. This was going to get worse before it got better. But as I lay in bed that night, I found myself feeling something unexpected. Not fear, not despair, but a grim determination. I had been underestimated my entire life. As a young woman, as a wife, as a mother. People assumed that because I was kind, because I was accommodating, I was weak. Camden had made that mistake. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Chapter 4. Unexpected Allies. 3 weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. I remained in the hotel, extending my stay week by week, watching my savings dwindle with each transaction. Iris worked on my case, filing motions, building our defense against the guardianship petition Camden had officially filed. The court date was set for early November, which gave us time to prepare, but also left me suspended in uncertainty. I established a routine to keep myself grounded. Morning walks along the harbor. Breakfast at a small diner 3 blocks from the hotel where the owner, a Kurdish immigrant named Berivan, made the best omelets I had ever tasted. Afternoons spent in the public library, reading or sometimes just sitting among the books, finding comfort in their silent company. It was at the library that I met Walter Kemp. He was there almost every day, a thin man in his late 70s with white hair and deep-set eyes that looked perpetually sad. He always sat at the same table near the history section, reading thick biographies and occasionally making notes in a leather journal. We acknowledged each other with small nods for several days before he finally spoke to me. I was reaching for a book on the Baltimore fire of 1804, and his voice startled me. That's a good one. Very detailed account of the rebuilding efforts. I turned to find him standing a respectful distance away, his hands in the pockets of his cardigan. "Thank you," I said, pulling the book from the shelf. He introduced himself, and we fell into conversation. He was a retired history professor from Johns Hopkins, a widower whose wife had died 3 years earlier from pancreatic cancer. He came to the library every day because his house felt too empty, too quiet. I understood that feeling perfectly. Over the following week, our casual conversations deepened. He told me about his wife, Lenore, about their 52 years together, about how her death had untethered him from the world. I told him about Marcus, about the life we had built, about how his death had been the first crack in the foundation of my family, though I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't tell Walter about Camden and the legal battle at first. I wasn't ready to expose that wound to someone I barely knew. But one afternoon, after we had taken to having lunch together at a small sandwich shop near the library, he noticed how distracted I was, how I kept checking my phone anxiously. "Everything all right?" His question was gentle, not prying, and something in his tone, the genuine concern in it, broke through my defenses. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as I detailed Camden's plan, the video, my escape, the ongoing legal battle. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at his half-eaten sandwich. Finally, he spoke. "I taught thousands of students over my career. Some became successful, some didn't. But the ones who failed most spectacularly were always the ones who mistook kindness for weakness in others. Your son has made that mistake. I appreciate that," I said softly. Walter looked directly at me. "My house is too big for one person. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths. It's in Mount Vernon, good neighborhood. The rent I'm paying to myself is exactly $0. He let that sit between us for a moment before continuing. "I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm simply stating a fact. I have space. You need space. And frankly, I could use the company. Lenore would have liked you." I was stunned. We had known each other barely 2 weeks, and he was offering me a place to live. "Walter, I can't accept that. You don't even know me." He smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "I know enough. I know you're in trouble through no fault of your own. I know you're running out of money in that hotel. And I know that you remind me of Lenore, not in appearance but in spirit. She would have fought too." Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because when Lenore was sick, strangers helped us. A neighbor drove us to appointments when I was too exhausted to drive safely. A woman from her book club organized meal deliveries for months. A young couple we barely knew set up a fundraiser to help with medical bills. People are capable of extraordinary kindness. Thora, let me be that for you." I thought about it for the rest of the day. That evening, I called Iris and explained the situation, asking if there were any legal complications. She saw none. In fact, She thought having a stable living situation would strengthen my case against the guardianship petition. The next day, I accepted Walter's offer. His house was exactly as he described. A beautiful row house with high ceilings and crown molding, filled with books and photographs of his life with Lenore. The room he offered me was on the second floor, painted a soft yellow with a window overlooking a small garden. It was more than I could have hoped for. Walter helped me move my single suitcase from the hotel, insisting on paying for the taxi despite my protests. That evening, we sat in his living room drinking tea, and he showed me photos of Lenore, telling me stories about their travels, their life together. She was a labor organizer, he explained. Spent 40 years fighting for workers' rights, tougher than anyone I ever knew. Cancer couldn't even keep her down until the very end. She sounds remarkable, I said. He nodded, his eyes distant. She was, and she taught me that the world runs on the kindness of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So here we are. Walter and I fell into a comfortable routine. He respected my privacy, but was there when I needed to talk. We cooked dinner together most evenings, sharing the work and the company. He attended one of my court hearings, sitting quietly in the back, but giving me a nod of support when I glanced his way. Meadow texted me frequently on her secret phone. Camden and Sloan had indeed hired a lawyer, an aggressive woman named Darlene Voss, who was building a case that I was mentally declining and that my sudden departure was evidence of confusion and poor judgment. Iris prepared our defense methodically. She had medical records showing I was physically healthy and mentally sharp. She had the detective's report. She had Walter's statement as a character witness. And most damning for Camden, she had that video, his own words condemning him. But guardianship cases are tricky. Judges often err on the side of caution, especially when adult children express concern. The hearing was scheduled for November 7th, exactly 1 month after I had walked out of my house. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I lay in Walter's guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle around me. I thought about all the possible outcomes. If I won, I would be free to live my life as I chose, but I would have permanently severed my relationship with my son. If I lost, I would be placed under Camden's control, the very thing I had fled from. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Walter was in the kitchen, also unable to rest. He made us both warm milk with honey, an old remedy Lenore had sworn by. We sat at his kitchen table, 2 old people facing uncertain futures. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know how grateful I am, I told him. You gave me back my dignity when I needed it most. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. You never lost your dignity, Thora. You just lost sight of it for a moment. Tomorrow, you'll remind everyone else of what they forgot. His faith in me was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. When dawn finally came, I dressed carefully in a navy suit Iris had helped me select, choosing to look professional and competent. Walter drove me to the courthouse, and Iris met us at the entrance. The hearing room was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. Camden and Sloan sat on one side with their attorney, Darlene Voss, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit. I sat on the other side with Iris. Walter took a seat in the public gallery. Camden wouldn't look at me. Sloan stared daggers. The judge, an older woman named Honor Treadwell, entered, and we all stood. What happened over the next 3 hours would determine the rest of my life, and I was ready to fight for it. Chapter 5. The Verdict. Judge Treadwell reviewed the case files in silence, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she flipped through pages of testimony, medical records, and legal filings. The courtroom was quiet, except for the soft rustle of paper and the occasional cough from someone in the gallery. Finally, she looked up, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. This is a guardianship petition filed by Camden Bancroft on behalf of his mother, Thora Bancroft, alleging mental incapacity and inability to care for herself. Mrs. Bancroft contests this petition. We'll hear opening statements from both sides. Darlene Voss stood first, her posture confident, and her voice measured. She painted a picture of a concerned son, worried about his aging mother's sudden behavioral changes, the impulsive decision to leave her home without notice, the refusal to communicate with family. She made me sound unstable, irrational, dangerous to myself. She carefully avoided mentioning the video, which Iris had submitted as evidence. but which hadn't yet been addressed directly. When Darlene finished, Iris stood. She was shorter than Darlene, less polished in appearance, but when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Your Honor, this case is not about an elderly woman in decline. This is about financial exploitation and a son's attempt to seize control of his mother's assets through legal manipulation. Mrs. Bancroft left her home because she discovered her son's plan to institutionalize her against her will for financial gain. She didn't flee in confusion. She fled in self-defense. Iris let that statement hang in the air before continuing. The evidence will show that Mrs. Bancroft is fully competent, that she has taken reasonable and appropriate steps to protect herself, and that this guardianship petition is nothing more than retaliation for her refusal to be victimized. Judge Treadwell made notes, then called for witnesses. The first witness was Camden. I watched him walk to the stand, this man I had raised, who looked like Marcus but lacked his father's integrity. He was sworn in and sat down, his expression practiced and concerned. Darlene walked him through his narrative, how he had noticed changes in my behavior over the past year, memory lapses that I supposedly denied, confusion about finances, increasing isolation from friends, all lies, carefully constructed. She asked about the morning I left. Camden described coming home to find me gone. Meadow in tears, no note, no explanation. I was terrified, he said, his voice breaking slightly. My mother is 71 years old. She has no close friends nearby. I thought something terrible had happened. When it was Iris's turn to cross-examine, she approached him calmly. Mr. Bancroft, do you have power of attorney over your mother's affairs? Camden hesitated. I did, yes. She signed the document several years ago. Past tense? You did have power of attorney? She revoked it recently. After she left your home? Yes. Iris nodded slowly. And why do you think she did that? Camden's jaw tightened. I believe she was confused and influenced by outside parties. Outside parties like her attorney, like the people helping her protect herself. Objection, Darlene said. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Treadwell replied. Iris changed tactics. Mr. Bancroft, were you planning to place your mother in a nursing home? Camden glanced at Darlene before answering. We were exploring options for her care. Yes, without her knowledge or consent. We wanted to present her with information so she could make an informed decision. Iris pulled out a tablet and approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to play a video that was recorded in Mr. Bancroft's home. Objection, Darlene said immediately. Chain of custody is questionable, and the recording was made without my client's knowledge. Judge Treadwell considered. I'll allow it, but I'll determine its weight after viewing. The video played on a screen visible to the entire courtroom. Camden's voice filled the space, cold and calculating as he detailed his plans. The part about me supposedly declining mentally, about gaining access to my home's deed, about splitting the proceeds. I watched Camden's face drain of color as his own words condemned him. When it ended, the courtroom was silent. Iris spoke quietly. Mr. Bancroft, is that your voice on the recording? Camden stammered. That conversation was taken out of context. What context would make planning to institutionalize your mother for financial gain acceptable? Darlene objected again, but the damage was done. The judge dismissed Camden from the stand. Next, Sloane was called. She was more composed than Camden, but Iris dismantled her testimony with equal precision, highlighting contradictions and exposing the financial motivations behind the guardianship petition. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand on legs that trembled slightly but held firm. I was sworn in and sat down, facing the courtroom. Iris asked me gentle questions first, establishing my daily routines, my mental clarity, my reasons for leaving. I spoke directly to the judge. I left my home because I discovered that my son and his wife were planning to place me in a facility against my will so they could access my assets. I was not confused. I was betrayed. I took steps to protect myself because no one else was going to protect me. Darlene's cross-examination was harsh, trying to paint me as vindictive, as someone fabricating accusations to maintain control, but I didn't waver. I answered every question clearly, maintaining eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. When I stepped down, I felt exhausted but unbowed. Walter was called as a character witness. He spoke about the weeks I had lived in his home, about my routines, my mental sharpness, my independence. Finally, Judge Treadwell called for closing statements. Darlene argued that despite the unfortunate recording, the core concern remained: an elderly woman living with a stranger, cut off from family, making impulsive decisions that could endanger her welfare. Iris countered that I had every right to choose where I lived and with whom, that competency didn't mean agreeing with one's children, and that the recording proved exactly why I needed protection from Camden, not the other way around. Judge Treadwell took a short recess, and we waited in the hallway. Walter brought me water. Iris reviewed her notes, though there was nothing left to do but wait. 30 minutes later, we were called back in. Judge Treadwell had made her decision. She addressed the courtroom formally. I have reviewed all testimony and evidence presented today. This court finds that Thora Bancroft is fully competent to manage her own affairs and make her own decisions regarding her living situation and health care. Relief flooded through me, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I find that the guardianship petition appears to have been filed not out of genuine concern for Mrs. Bancroft's welfare, but as retaliation for her refusal to be financially exploited. The recording submitted into evidence is deeply troubling and suggests a pattern of manipulation and intended abuse. She turned her gaze to Camden and Sloane, and her expression hardened. Mr. Bancroft, Ms. Hastings, I am denying this petition in its entirety. The temporary restraining order will be made permanent. You are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Bancroft, entering her property, or attempting to exert any control over her financial or medical decisions. Should you violate this order, you will be held in contempt. Camden's face was red, whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell. Mrs. Bancroft, the judge continued, turning to me, you are free to live as you choose. I encourage you to maintain updated legal documents to protect yourself, but this court finds no basis for any restriction on your autonomy. She struck her gavel, and it was over. Iris hugged me. Walter shook my hand with tears in his eyes, and I stood there in the courtroom feeling something I hadn't felt in months, victorious. But as Camden and Sloane left, Camden finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't remorse. It was hatred, and I knew that while I had won this battle, the war was far from over. Tabruan, Chapter 6, Building a New Life. The weeks following the hearing passed in a strange mixture of relief and grief. I had won my freedom, but at the cost of my family. I moved permanently into Walter's house, and we established a comfortable partnership. I helped with cooking and household tasks. He provided stability and companionship. We were two broken people helping each other stay whole. Thanksgiving approached, and for the first time in decades, I had nowhere to go, no one to cook for. Walter suggested we have dinner together, maybe invite a few of his colleagues who also had nowhere to go. It sounded better than spending the day alone. The morning of Thanksgiving, Meadow texted me, "Can I see you? Please? I miss you so much." My heart broke reading those words. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, away from Camden and Sloane's likely surveillance. She arrived wearing a heavy coat and looking thinner than I remembered. The moment she saw me, she ran into my arms, and we both cried. We sat in a corner booth, and she told me everything. How tense the house had been since the hearing. How Camden barely spoke except to complain about legal bills. How Sloane blamed Meadow for showing me the video, calling her a traitor. "I'm so sorry you're going through this," I told her. She shook her head. "I'm not sorry I showed you. You deserve to know the truth." We spent 2 hours together, talking about school, about her friends, about anything except the pain between us. When it was time to leave, I gave her Walter's address. "If you ever need me, if things get bad at home, you call me, day or night." She nodded, memorizing the information. As I watched her walk away, I felt a deep ache. She was 12 years old and caught in a war not of her making. Walter's Thanksgiving dinner was modest, but warm. 6 people gathered around his dining table, all older, all alone, all grateful for the company. We shared stories and laughter, and for a few hours, the pain receded. December arrived with cold rain and gray skies. I began thinking seriously about my future. I couldn't live with Walter indefinitely, no matter how generous he was. I met with Iris to discuss my options. The house was still mine, legally secure now, but I couldn't imagine returning to it. Too many ghosts, too many betrayals embedded in those walls. "What if I sold it?" I asked. Iris nodded. "That's your right. The market is good right now. You could probably get a substantial amount. The idea took root. I could sell the house, take the money, start fresh somewhere new. But where? I had lived in Baltimore my entire life. Marcus was buried here. My memories, good and bad, were rooted in this city. Still, the idea of escape, of a clean break, grew more appealing daily. I listed the house in January with a local realtor. She was optimistic about a quick sale given the neighborhood and the condition of the property. Camden found out within days. I received a certified letter from Darlene Voss threatening legal action, claiming I was disposing of family assets that should be preserved for Camden's inheritance. Iris laughed when I showed her the letter. He has no legal standing. This is harassment. I'll respond accordingly. The house sold in 3 weeks to a young couple expecting their first child. I met them once during the inspection, and they seemed kind, excited about raising their family there. I hoped they would fill it with better memories than mine. The closing was in February. I signed papers in the title company's office, and just like that, 43 years of my life transferred to strangers for a sum of money that seemed both enormous and insufficient. After the closing, I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried. Not for the house itself, but for what it represented. The life I had built with Marcus. The years of raising Camden. The family dinners and holidays and ordinary moments that had once felt permanent. All of it gone now, reduced to signatures on legal documents. Walter was waiting when I returned to his house. He made tea and let me sit in silence until I was ready to talk. "What will you do now?" he asked gently. "I don't know. Leave Baltimore, maybe. Start over somewhere." He nodded thoughtfully. "Lenore always wanted to live by the ocean. We talked about retiring to the coast. But then she got sick, and it never happened. Where would you go if you could?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "I'm too old to start over. But you're not, Thora. You're 71, but you're healthy and strong. You have time for a whole new chapter." His words stayed with me. That night, I searched online for small coastal towns, places where living expenses were reasonable and the pace of life was slower. I found a town in North Carolina called Beaufort, a historic fishing village with charm and character. The photos showed tree-lined streets, waterfront parks, art galleries, and restaurants. It looked peaceful. On impulse, I booked a hotel room for a week and decided to visit. Walter drove me to the train station, and we hugged goodbye like old friends, which we had become. "Come back if it's not right," he said. "There's always a room here for you." The train ride south took most of the day. I watched the landscape change from urban to rural, from bare winter trees to evergreen forests. Beaufort was everything the photos promised. Quaint without being precious, alive without being overwhelming. I walked the waterfront, ate fresh seafood, visited the Maritime Museum, and talked to locals who were friendly without being intrusive. By the third day, I knew I could live here. I met with a realtor who showed me several options. The one that captured my heart was a small cottage 3 blocks from the water, pale blue with white trim, a front porch with a swing, a tiny garden already planted with early spring bulbs. It was affordable with the money from my house sale, with enough left over for living expenses and emergencies. I made an offer that afternoon. It was accepted the next morning. By mid-March, I was moving into my new home. Walter helped me pack my few belongings and drove down with me to help me settle in. He spent a weekend helping me arrange furniture, hang curtains, and stock the kitchen. Before he left, we sat on my new porch drinking iced tea and watching boats in the harbor. "You did it," he said quietly. "You saved yourself." "We saved each other," I corrected. He smiled and squeezed my hand. After he left, I stood in my empty cottage, surrounded by boxes and possibilities, and felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Tartry. Chapter 7. Settling in spring arrived in Beaufort with an explosion of color. The garden that had looked dormant when I moved in burst into life with daffodils, tulips, and azaleas. I spent hours each day working in the soil, planting new flowers, pulling weeds, rediscovering a passion for gardening I had neglected for years. The physical work was therapeutic. My hands in the dirt, the sun on my back. The simple act of nurturing something to life helped heal parts of me I didn't know were damaged. The town itself was welcoming in that particular southern way, friendly but not intrusive. My neighbors, a retired couple named Hugh and Opal Drummond, brought me a casserole the day I moved in and invited me to church, which I politely declined. But Opal was persistent in the best way, stopping by every few days with small offerings, fresh tomatoes from her garden, an invitation to a book club, information about a local volunteer organization. I started attending the book club, held monthly at the library. The women were mostly my age or older, smart and funny, and refreshingly straightforward. They welcomed me without demanding my history, content to let me share what I wanted when I was ready. I also began volunteering at the Maritime Museum, giving tours and helping with educational programs. The work kept me engaged and connected me to the community. Meadow and I maintained contact through her secret phone. She was struggling at home, the tension between her parents constant and toxic. Her grades had dropped, and she was seeing a therapist, which gave me some comfort. Camden and Sloan had apparently moved on from their legal efforts, but not from their resentment. According to Meadow, I was never mentioned in the house, except in the context of how I had ruined everything. It hurt to hear, but I had made peace with the fact that my relationship with Camden was beyond repair. In May, something unexpected happened. I was working in my garden when a car pulled up in front of my cottage. A woman in her 40s got out, well-dressed and professional-looking. She approached hesitantly. "Are you Thora Bancroft?" I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, suddenly wary. "Yes." She introduced herself as Bryn Lattimore, a journalist with a Baltimore magazine. She had heard about my case through court records and wanted to write a story about financial elder abuse and exploitation within families. My first instinct was to refuse. I didn't want my pain displayed for public consumption. But Bryn was persuasive. She explained that elder abuse was vastly underreported, that most victims were too ashamed or frightened to come forward, and that my story, with its video evidence and legal victory, could help others recognize the warning signs and find the courage to protect themselves. I invited her in and made tea, and we talked for over 2 hours. She was respectful, asking permission before touching on sensitive topics, never pushing when I became emotional. By the end of the conversation, I had agreed to let her write the story, with the condition that Meadow's identity would be protected. The article was published in July, a long-form piece with my photo and excerpts from the court testimony. The headline read, "When Your Children Become Your Enemy, One Woman's Fight for Freedom." The response was overwhelming. I received letters from dozens of people, mostly elderly women, sharing their own stories of exploitation by adult children, of feeling trapped and helpless, of financial manipulation disguised as concern. Some had escaped their situations. Many had not. Their stories broke my heart and reinforced why I had fought so hard for my own freedom. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly I was being invited to speak at senior centers and community groups about recognizing and preventing elder abuse. At first, I was terrified. Public speaking had never been my strength. But the first time I stood in front of a room of elderly people and shared my experience, and saw the recognition in their eyes, the relief of knowing they weren't alone, I understood the power of speaking truth. I continued to speak throughout the summer, traveling to different towns in North Carolina, sometimes as far as Virginia and South Carolina. Each event left me exhausted but also energized, connected to a purpose I hadn't known I needed. Walter came to visit in August, staying for a long weekend. We walked along the waterfront, visited historic sites, and spent evenings on my porch talking about everything and nothing. "You've built something good here," he observed. "You seem happy." "I am," I said, surprised to realize it was true. Not happy the way I was before, but happy in a different way. Settled, at peace. He smiled. "Lenore would say that's the best kind of happiness, the kind you build yourself after everything else falls apart." We were sitting in comfortable silence when my phone rang. Meadow's number. I answered immediately, but it wasn't Meadow's voice. "Mrs. Bancroft, this is Janet Hollis, the school counselor at Meadow's school. She asked me to call you." "What's wrong?" My heart hammered. "Meadow is in my office. She's safe, but she's very upset. She says things at home have become intolerable, and she wants to live with you." The ground shifted beneath me. "Can I talk to her?" Meadow's voice came on the line, thick with tears. "Grandma, I can't stay here anymore. They fight all the time. Mom drinks now. Dad is never home. And when they are together, they blame me for everything." She broke down sobbing. "Where are your parents now?" I asked. "Mom is at work. Dad is traveling. The counselor says I can't leave school without a parent or guardian, but I told her you're my emergency contact." I looked at Walter. who had heard enough to understand something serious was happening. "Okay, sweetheart. I'm coming to get you. It's going to take me about 7 hours to drive there. Can you stay with Mrs. Hollis until I arrive?" She agreed, and I spoke briefly with the counselor, who confirmed that I was indeed listed as an emergency contact and that she would keep Meadow safe until I arrived. I hung up and turned to Walter. "I have to go to Baltimore." He nodded. "I'll drive. You're too upset." We threw essentials into a bag and were on the road within 30 minutes. The drive felt endless. Walter drove steadily while I alternated between calling Iris for legal advice and trying to calm my racing thoughts. Iris was direct. "If Meadow wants to live with you and her parents are neglecting her, you can file for custody. But it will be a fight, and it will destroy what little is left of your relationship with Camden." "That relationship is already destroyed," I said flatly. We arrived at the school just after 6 in the evening. Meadow was waiting in the counselor's office, her backpack beside her, her eyes red and swollen. She ran to me, and I held her tight. This child who had saved me and now needed saving herself. Mrs. Hollis explained that she had tried calling both Camden and Sloane repeatedly, but had gotten no response. She couldn't legally release Meadow to me without parental permission, but given the circumstances and my emergency contact status, she was willing to bend the rules. "I'll document everything," she said quietly. "If this goes to court, you'll need evidence of their negligence." We drove back to my car, which I had left at Walter's house. Meadow sat in the back seat, silent and exhausted. At Walter's, I got her settled in the guest room while Walter made sandwiches none of us had appetite for. My phone rang constantly. Camden, Sloane, numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored all of them. Finally, I answered one call from Sloane. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She was screaming. "You kidnapped our daughter." "I didn't kidnap anyone." "Meadow called me because apparently you and Camden have created such a toxic environment she can't live there anymore. You're poisoning her against us. I'm protecting her. Something you should have been doing." I hung up. That night, after Meadow had cried herself to sleep, I sat with Walter in his living room. "What have I done?" I whispered. "I just started a war. I'm not sure I can win." Walter shook his head. "You did what needed to be done. That child asked for help. You answered. That's not starting a war. That's being a grandmother." But the fear remained. Camden and Sloane would fight this with everything they had, not because they loved Meadow, but because losing custody would be another public humiliation, another failure to add to their list. And I was about to drag all of us through court again, exposing Meadow to scrutiny and pain. But when I checked on her before going to bed, found her curled up in Walter's guest bed clutching an old stuffed animal, I knew I had no choice. She needed me, and I would not fail her the way I had failed to protect myself for so long. Chapter 8. The Custody Fight. The legal battle for Meadow's custody was brutal and prolonged. Iris filed an emergency petition, arguing that Meadow was in an emotionally harmful environment and that I could provide a stable, loving home. Camden and Sloane hired a different lawyer this time, a man named Preston Wolfe who specialized in high-conflict custody cases. He was expensive and ruthless. The first hearing was held 10 days after I had taken Meadow from school. The judge, a stern man named Clarence Vance, ordered a temporary custody arrangement. Meadow would stay with me while a full investigation was conducted by Child Protective Services. Camden looked like he wanted to kill me when the ruling was announced. Sloane stared at Meadow with such coldness, I instinctively moved between them. The CPS investigation involved home visits, interviews, psychological evaluations. A social worker named Rita Coburn came to my cottage in Beaufort, interviewed me extensively, observed my interactions with Meadow, and assessed the living situation. Meadow had her own bedroom, a small space I had quickly furnished with a bed, a desk, and cheerful yellow curtains. She had enrolled in the local middle school and was already making friends, her grades improving dramatically. Rita's report was favorable. She noted that Meadow appeared happy, healthy, and thriving in my care. She also documented the evidence of neglect in Camden and Sloane's home, missed parent-teacher conferences, counseling appointments they never attended, Meadow's declining grades and behavioral issues before she left. But Preston Wolfe built a compelling counter-narrative. He painted me as an embittered grandmother manipulating a vulnerable child, using her as revenge against her parents for the guardianship case. He brought in a psychologist who testified that removing children from their parents, even in difficult situations, causes trauma that can last a lifetime. He emphasized that Camden and Sloan had never been accused of physical abuse, that emotional difficulties didn't justify severing parental rights. The trial stretched over weeks, with multiple hearings and endless testimony. Meadow herself was interviewed by the judge in his chambers, without either party present. She was 12 years old enough for her wishes to be considered, but not old enough for them to be determinative. I waited outside the chambers for over an hour while she spoke to Judge Vance. When she emerged, her face was blotchy from crying, but she looked at me and nodded slightly. The final hearing was scheduled for October, almost exactly 1 year after I had first walked out of Camden's house. The night before, Meadow and I sat on my porch watching the sunset over the water. What if the judge makes me go back? Her voice was small, frightened. Then we'll figure something out. I won't let you suffer there. But we both knew that if the judge ruled against us, my options were limited. The courtroom was packed the next morning. The case had attracted media attention thanks to the earlier article, and several journalists were present. Judge Vance entered, and we all stood. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, summarizing the case, the evidence, the competing claims. Then he delivered his ruling. This court finds that while Camden and Sloan Bancroft are not unfit parents in the traditional sense, they have created an environment that is emotionally harmful to their daughter. The evidence shows neglect, not of physical needs, but of emotional and psychological needs. He paused, looking directly at Camden and Sloan. Furthermore, the court finds that Meadow has thrived in her grandmother's care. Her grades have improved dramatically. Her counselor reports significant progress in her emotional well-being. She has expressed a clear and consistent desire to remain with her grandmother. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Therefore, the court awards primary physical custody to Thora Bancroft. Camden and Sloan Bancroft will have supervised visitation rights twice monthly, provided Meadow agrees to such visits. Meadow grabbed my hand and squeezed tight. We had won, but the look on Camden's face told me he would never forgive this. As we left the courtroom, he approached us, ignoring the restraining order that technically still applied. "You've taken everything from me," he said, his voice low and venomous. "My inheritance, my daughter, my reputation. I hope you're happy." I met his eyes without flinching. "I didn't take anything, Camden. You threw it all away yourself." He walked away without another word, Sloan following silently behind him. Outside, Iris hugged us both. "You did it. Both of you. You saved each other." Meadow looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Can we go home now, Grandma?" "Home. To my little blue cottage by the water. To the life we were building together." "Yes, sweetheart. We can go home." Chapter 9. The first year. Adjusting to life with Meadow was both joyful and challenging. She was 12, on the cusp of adolescence, dealing with trauma and grief alongside the normal difficulties of her age. There were good days when she laughed easily, helped in the garden, and talked excitedly about her new friends and school projects. And there were hard days when she was angry at everyone, when she lashed out, when she cried for her parents despite everything they had done. I tried to be patient, to understand that she was mourning the loss of the family she had wanted, even if it wasn't the family she actually had. We attended therapy together, both individual and family sessions. Dr. Nora Sterling, a child psychologist in Beaufort, helped us navigate our new relationship, establishing boundaries and communication patterns. She also helped me understand that Meadow's love for her parents didn't diminish her choice to live with me, that children are capable of holding multiple conflicting truths simultaneously. The supervised visitations with Camden and Sloan were painful for everyone. They took place at a neutral facility, monitored by a court-appointed supervisor. Camden and Sloan would show up exactly on time, spend the required 2 hours with Meadow, and leave. There was no warmth, no genuine connection. It felt performative, like they were fulfilling an obligation rather than spending time with their daughter. After the third visit, Meadow asked if she could stop going. "They don't even talk to me," she said. "They just ask about school and then sit there looking at their phones." I explained that legally she had to attend, unless we went back to court to modify the agreement. She accepted this with resignation beyond her years. Meanwhile, I was building a community for us in Beaufort. Opal and Hugh became surrogate grandparents to Meadow, having her over for cookies and teaching her to play chess. The book club women embraced her. Several of them retired teachers who offered tutoring when Meadow struggled with algebra. Walter visited regularly, usually staying a long weekend once a month. Meadow adored him, and he was patient with her in ways I sometimes couldn't be, having a perspective untainted by parental guilt or familial obligation. My speaking engagements continued, though less frequently. I was selective now, only accepting invitations that didn't interfere with Meadow's schedule or needs. But I still felt called to share my story, to help other elderly people recognize and escape exploitation. One particularly memorable event was at a senior center in Asheville. After my presentation, an elderly woman in her 80s approached me with tears streaming down her face. "My daughter has been stealing from me for years," she whispered. "I knew, but I couldn't admit it. Hearing your story, knowing someone else survived this, it gives me courage." I held her hand and gave her Iris's contact information, along with information for local elder law attorneys. 3 months later, I received a letter from her thanking me. She had confronted her daughter, involved the police, and recovered most of her stolen money. She was living independently now in a senior community and felt free for the first time in years. These moments reminded me why the pain had been worth it. In December, Meadow's 13th birthday approached. I planned a party, inviting her new friends from school, decorating the cottage with streamers and balloons. The morning of her birthday, she received a card in the mail from Camden and Sloan. Inside was a gift card to a clothing store and a brief, impersonal message. "Happy birthday. Love, Mom and Dad." Meadow stared at it for a long moment, then quietly put it in her desk drawer. That afternoon, surrounded by friends and laughter and cake, she seemed happy. But that evening, after everyone had left, I found her crying in her room. I sat beside her and pulled her close. "Talk to me." She struggled to find words. "I know they're bad parents. I know what they did to you and what they were going to do to me. But they're still my parents and I miss them. The them they used to be. Anyway. Or maybe the them I wished they were." Her words broke my heart. It's okay to miss them. It's okay to love them even when they hurt you. That's part of being human. Does it ever stop hurting? I thought about Marcus, about the son I had lost, about all the pain I carried. Eventually, it hurts less, but I don't think it ever completely stops. She nodded against my shoulder, and we sat there in the gathering darkness until her tears subsided. Christmas was quiet. Walter came for a week, and we made cookies, watched old movies, and tried to create new traditions that didn't echo the painful memories of holidays past. Meadow talked to Camden and Sloan on Christmas morning via video call. It lasted 15 awkward minutes before they said they had to go. After she hung up, Meadow turned to Walter and me with forced cheerfulness. "Can we make hot chocolate and play board games?" We spent the rest of the day doing exactly that. As the new year arrived, I felt a tentative optimism. Meadow was healing. I was healing. We were building something real and good together. But in February, everything changed. I received a letter from Preston Wolfe, Camden and Sloan's attorney. Camden and Sloan were petitioning the court to modify the custody arrangement. They claimed that with counseling and time, they had addressed the issues that led to the original ruling. They wanted joint custody, with Meadow spending half the year in Baltimore and half in Beaufort. Iris read the petition and shook her head. They're within their rights to file for modification, but the standard is high. They have to show a significant change in circumstances. What do? We fight again. I was so tired of fighting, but when I looked at Meadow, thriving in school, laughing with friends, finally feeling safe, I knew I had no choice. We would fight, and this time, I wasn't sure we would win. Chapter 10. The Second Battle. The modification hearing was scheduled for April. Iris worked tirelessly to prepare our defense, documenting Meadow's continued progress, gathering testimony from teachers, counselors, and community members about the stability and support we had built. Preston Wolfe was equally prepared. He brought evidence that Camden and Sloan had completed family counseling, that they had made changes to their work schedules to prioritize Meadow, that they had addressed the issues raised in the original custody decision. Whether any of it was genuine or merely performative was impossible to determine. The hearing lasted 3 days. Camden took the stand and delivered what appeared to be a heartfelt apology. He claimed he had been under tremendous stress during the guardianship case, that he had made terrible decisions driven by financial pressure and pride. He said he understood now how much he had hurt me and Meadow, and that he wanted the chance to rebuild their relationship. It was a good performance, convincing enough that I saw some sympathy in Judge Vance's eyes. Sloane testified similarly, admitting to neglecting Meadow during the difficult period, claiming she had been dealing with her own mental health struggles that she was now addressing through therapy. Then Meadow was called to testify. She was 13 now, older than during the first custody case, and the judge gave significant weight to her stated preferences. I watched her walk to the stand, this child who had already endured too much, and my heart ached. Judge Vance asked her gentle questions. Did she want to maintain a relationship with her parents? Yes, she said quietly. Did she feel safe with them? A longer pause. I think so. Did she want to live with them part-time? She looked at me, then at Camden and Sloane, then back at the judge. I don't know. I'm happy where I am, but I feel guilty that they're sad. That guilt, that sense of responsibility for her parents' emotions, was exactly what I had feared. Judge Vance asked more questions, probing gently into her feelings, her experiences, her wishes for the future. Meadow answered honestly, her confusion and conflict evident in every word. When she stepped down, I wanted to rush to her, to hold her and tell her she didn't have to feel guilty, that their sadness was not her responsibility. But I remained in my seat, waiting. Finally, closing arguments. Iris made a passionate case for maintaining the current arrangement, emphasizing stability and Meadow's well-being. Preston argued that parents deserve second chances, that Camden and Sloane had demonstrated genuine change, and that Meadow needed both her parents in her life. Judge Vance took a week to deliberate. Those 7 days were agonizing. I tried to maintain normalcy for Meadow, but we both felt the weight of the impending decision. The morning the ruling was announced, I dressed carefully, helped Meadow get ready, and drove us to the courthouse. Walter had driven down again to be there, and his presence was a comfort. Judge Vance entered, and we stood. He spoke for a long time about the difficulty of these decisions, about balancing parental rights with child welfare, about the importance of maintaining family connections when possible. Then he delivered his ruling. This court acknowledges that Camden and Sloane Bancroft have made efforts to address their previous deficiencies. However, the standard for modification of custody is high. The petitioners must demonstrate not just improvement, but a substantial change in circumstances that justifies disrupting the child's current stability. My hands gripped the edge of the table. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, this court finds that while the petitioners have made progress, it is not sufficient to warrant a change in the custody arrangement at this time. The current arrangement has provided Meadow with stability, support, and an environment in which she is thriving. Disrupting that would not be in her best interest. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I felt lightheaded. However, the judge continued, this court does find merit in increasing visitation to allow for relationship repair. Therefore, visitation will be expanded to 1 weekend per month, unsupervised, in Baltimore. After 6 months, we will review the arrangement to determine if further modification is appropriate. It wasn't the complete victory I had hoped for, but it was enough. Meadow would remain with me primarily, but she would have more time with her parents, giving them the chance to prove whether their changes were real. Outside the courtroom, Meadow hugged me tightly. I'm glad I get to stay with you, she whispered, but I hope they actually try this time. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Camden approached us before we could leave. His expression was hard to read, a mixture of defeat and determination. 1 weekend a month, he said. I'll make the most of it. And in 6 months, we'll be back here. It wasn't a threat exactly, but it wasn't a peace offering either. I simply nodded and walked away with Meadow. The first extended visitation weekend came in May. I drove Meadow to Baltimore, dropped her at a neutral meeting location, and watched her walk toward her parents with obvious trepidation. I spent that weekend anxious and distracted, waiting for her call if something went wrong. When I picked her up Sunday evening, she was quiet. The visit had been okay, she said. Not great, not terrible, just okay. It became the pattern. Once a month, I would drive her to Baltimore. She would spend the weekend with Camden and Sloane, and she would come back reporting that it was fine. Not wonderful, not awful, just fine. I couldn't tell if they were genuinely trying or just going through the motions until the 6-month review. Meanwhile, life continued. Meadow turned 14 in December. She was growing into a thoughtful, resilient young woman, though the scars of her early years remained. She still had nightmares sometimes. She still struggled with guilt and conflicting loyalties, but she was healing, slowly and steadily. I continued my advocacy work, though I had scaled it back significantly. Meadow was my priority now. Walter had become family, not just a friend. He spent Christmas with us again, and we were discussing him moving to Beaufort permanently. His house in Baltimore felt too full of ghosts, he said, and he liked the pace of life near the coast. In March, the 6-month review hearing arrived. Judge Vance listened to reports from the court-appointed monitor about the visitation weekends. They had been consistent and appropriate, with no incidents or concerns. Meadow testified again, now 14 and more articulate about her feelings. She said the visits were okay, that her relationship with her parents was improving slowly, but that she still wanted to live primarily with me. Judge Vance ruled that the current arrangement would continue for another year, at which point it would be reviewed again. Camden and Sloane accepted the ruling without protest, which surprised me. As we left the courthouse, Camden caught my eye. He didn't speak, but there was something different in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps the beginning of resignation. Maybe he was finally accepting that he had lost not just legal battles but his daughter's trust, and that rebuilding that would take years, not court orders. Or maybe I was reading too much into a single look. Either way, Meadow and I drove back to Beaufort that evening, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Peace. Not perfect, not without pain, but peace nonetheless.